Okay, so today we're doing causes of weather. So you've started your web quest. You should be doing good on that. For those of you who haven't, just it'll be fine. You'll get there eventually. So we are talking about what our actual causes of the weather are. So why does it snow? Why does it rain? Why do we have hot times and why do we have cold times? Uh, why did it frost this morning? Why did it snow yesterday? All these things. So the study of atmospheric phenomena, so weather, is called meteorology. So the Greek word meteoros means high in the air. So that's where meteorology comes from. You'll notice a lot of words in science come from either Greek or Latin based on how old of languages they are. So weather versus climate. Weather is a short-term phenomenon. So that means what's going on right now. Long term is a variation of pattern. So we've noticed actually that based on we just did the climate change project, that climate is changing based on the variation of weather. You'll see that based on this little map here, that we have four seasons just like parts of the southern hemisphere also have four seasons. You'll notice though that the rest of the world only has two seasons. They either have a wet and dry season or they have a polar day and a polar night, meaning that there is more sunlight or there is less sunlight. So, depending on when there is a little bit of a thaw and when there's not. Now, our four seasons are the same as South America, the southern tip of Africa, and Australia, based on different times of the year. We know this is part of the climate. Now, weather is what we see on a day to day basis, climate is what we see over years of time. So, a lot of it has to do with how our tilt of the earth. We talked about this when we did the tilt of the earth uh, astronomy section at the beginning of the year. We talked about how temperatures vary based on the amount of sunlight they get. And so, depending on which way we tilt, it depends on what the season is. So, that will also decide what the weather is going to be like. You're not going to see snow in July in Missouri, but you will probably see it in November and December because that's how the difference in sunlight is in the world and based on our tilt. Thermal energy redistributed. So you see how much moisture can be brought up based on the amount of sunlight and based on the amount of heat being arranged through the air. So if you have more heat, it's going to take up more water, which can cause more and stronger storms. So, like we talked about with the climate change project, the warmer it gets, the stronger the storms will get because that it will gather more water, and it will have to drop that water somewhere, and that creates stronger winds, stronger rainstorms, and it goes on from there. So all the way from thunderstorms to large weather systems to hurricanes. This is how we see the difference. Now we talked about air mass. Air masses in your web quest, but we're going to go a little bit deeper. So an air mass is a large volume of air that has the same characteristics such as humidity, temperature in a specific region coming from a source region. So if it is a maritime, it's going to be very wet because it's coming from a wet area. So whether that's going to be the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean or the Gulf of Mexico. If it is continental, it will be dry because it's coming from land, so you're not going to get as much. We do have a few specific things like lake effect snow that in Buffalo, New York, and in Michigan, they will get more snow based on the amount of water that's being taken up from the Great Lakes. So that's the one place that is over land, but technically it's still over water, that is going to give you more moisture than normal. Now, Arctic, think of very cold, so that's what it's going to be. Polar is also cold, but it's not nearly as cold as the Arctic. Because think about Arctic, it's coming off all that ice. Now, types maritime tropical. think tropical, think warm, and then maritime, think wet. So very warm and wet, you're going to have a lot more water that's going to be coming off of a air mass like that. Now, continental tropical, that's probably going to be a much hot, dry summer heat like we see. So think of desert if it's continental, because it's coming off of the desert in the United States and in Mexico. See, maritime tropical is coming up through our water. The desert area and mountains is going to be much drier than what you see. Maritime polar, that's where we're going to get a lot of our cold and wet winter storms from. So when we see weather come in, a lot of the time it's going to be coming from the Pacific Ocean to give us our snow. Now, if we have a colder air mass, if it meets with a warm air mass, that can create big storms as well, snowstorms as well, depending on how much further the continental polar air mass comes. Remember, continental meaning dry, polar meaning very cold, or not very cold, but cold. And then Arctic, of course, means extremely cold. So continental Arctic air masses, this is where we see all of our ice, so it's going to be very cold, and you might see a strong storm when it meets one of these air masses. This is where we call a nor'easter, usually when this happens, because the warm air mass comes up and hits that cold air and starts to dump a bunch of snow. Air mass modification, so when air travels over land or water for a long enough time, that is the source region. Now it can acquire the characteristics depending on how long it stays over the next thing. So let's say a maritime tropical is coming from the Pacific, it goes over the desert, and it stays there long enough that it can turn into a continental tropical instead of a maritime tropical. So it could just create that hot air instead of the liquid that it brings in. Now, like I said, the Great Lakes can cause lake effect snow because as it warms up, it goes across the lakes. It can gain all of that moisture and then drop snow based on the temperature that we see over here. So you can see how the Great Lakes could be warmer than the ground. That's why it can create so much lake effect snow. That is all for today. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a nice day.